Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angela Faulkner, and I am a Waiver Services Specialist with the Office of Aging and Disability Services. Thank you all for joining us today as we introduce a new option for members to receive services under Section 29. You will have an opportunity to ask questions following the presentation, or you can type your questions into the chat box and we will address them with others at the end. Also, if you are a developmental services community case manager and you would like a certificate of attendance, please type your name, agency, and your email address into the chat box. So over the next hour and a half, you will all receive an introduction to self-direction. We are very fortunate to have aligned with subject matter experts to implement this new option. Presenting today are Molly Morris and Kate Murray of Applied Self-Direction. Molly is the Director of Engagement at Applied Self-Direction. She works with stakeholders across the United States, including participants and families, states, and providers. She provides advocacy, training, and education to enhance and expand self-directed services nationwide. Kate Murray is a principal at Applied Self-Direction. She leads ASD's Technical Assistant Practice Area and works in conjunction with states and advocates to design and implement self-directed services. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass the mic right over to Molly Morris.
Thank you so much, Angela, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to you about self-direction and what you can expect in the Maine Care Section 29 waiver. Today's training includes case managers as well as participants and families, so I'm so glad that everyone can come together for this discussion. So just to give you a sense of what we're going to cover today, I really want to provide an introduction to the self-directed model and what it's all about, which will soon be available under the Maine Care Section 29 waiver. So today we're going to talk about what is self-direction. I'm going to give you some examples of what it really looks like in action in people's lives. And then we're going to really talk about what the addition of self-direction in Section 29 means for participants and families in Maine, as well as what it's going to mean for case managers. And then we're going to discuss some resources where you can learn more about self-direction after today. And we're reserving ample time for your questions and comments and discussion at the end of the webinar. So we look forward to that as well. So to begin talking about what is self-direction, I'd like to show you a brief video. It's just a couple minutes, going to give you an introduction, and then I'm going to drill down more into the concept. So let me get that started.
Long-term care that allows people to receive support in their home the way they want it, even people who might otherwise live in a nursing home or a group home. Let's take, for example, Betty, who needs 24/7 support, including help bathing and getting dressed. Then there's Michael, who needs support with job skills and getting rides to community events. With self-direction, people like Betty and Michael recruit, hire, and manage their own workers. That means Betty can hire her daughter to help her with intimate tasks like showering. And when Michael has a last-minute job interview, he simply asks his worker to drive him there and updates his schedule accordingly. They can also buy things to help them live more independently at home, like grab bars in Betty's bathroom, or a computer for Michael to connect with his peers. Self-direction programs have supports built in to help people set goals, make decisions about how to meet their needs, and manage payroll and paperwork. People who self-direct can also appoint a family member or friend to help manage their services and make decisions on their behalf. Across the country, self-direction gives millions of people more choice, control, and flexibility, so they can live safely and comfortably at home and remain part of their communities.
So that just gives you a little taste. Here, let me move past this here. All right. So let's recap what we just learned in that video. Self-direction is a model of delivering services in which the person who is receiving those Services has a high degree of choice and control over the services that you receive. So a person who self-directs is empowered to decide when, how, and from whom their services are delivered. And this is a program that's really based on the principle that people with disabilities know their needs best and really should lead the charge in the planning and managing of their own services. So self-direction programs allow people with disabilities to hire and fire their own staff, as well as manage a flexible budget. And I'm going to talk about that in a lot more detail here soon. So you may be wondering, well, who can self-direct? And the answer is everyone. Anybody can self-direct as long as they have the right and appropriate support. This is not a one-size-fits-all model, and everybody who self-directs is going to have a different experience, unique to them, unique to their needs and supports. So not everybody going into a self-direction program is willing or able to manage the employer and budget responsibilities on their own. And there are those who might need or would prefer someone else to manage those specific responsibilities, in which case you can appoint a representative. And a representative can really be anyone that the participant knows and trusts. It usually tends to be a family member or a friend. It is not required to be a legal guardian. And as I said, it's not one size fits all. So whatever is going to work best in case-by-case basis is how it's going to go. So how is self-direction different from traditional services? In a self-direction program, the person who self-directs actually employs their own staff. This is very different from traditional services where the personal care staff are actually employed by a separate agency. So self-directing is a lot like running your own small business. If you self-direct, you legally hire your own staff, even though those staff are paid via funds that you're eligible for through Medicaid, but those staff will work for you. You're the boss. This means that you decide who you want to hire, when they'll work on any given day in their weekly schedule, how they'll do their work. We'll talk more about the training, and how much they get paid. You'll decide that from your budget, and whether they're doing a good job. So what are the benefits of self-direction? You know, there is a strong, robust body of research on self-direction that's shown from a randomized controlled trial that self-directing participants were up to 90% more likely to be very satisfied with how they led their lives than people with comparable needs who did not participate in self-direction. Self-direction also really significantly reduced people's unmet personal care needs, and primary caregivers who are involved with self-direction were significantly more satisfied with their lives in general. And you know, there's much more research on self-direction that shows some of these positive findings. I find it's always the most helpful to hear from people who actually lived it themselves. One of our colleagues, Tim, who recently began self-directing in California, shared with us, I started self-directing 6 months ago, and it has been an absolute game changer. Now my stress levels are down, I'm exercising every day, I pick my team, and I create the schedule. I have not been this excited about my future in a long time. And we'll shortly share even more in depth about the lives of some people who have begun self-directing and what that's looked like. But first, I want to talk about what services can be self-directed through the Section 29 waiver. So the Section 29 waiver will offer the following services that can be self-directed: home support quarter hour, that's support for living at home; one-on-one community membership, that's support with building community connections, including developing skills and participating in community opportunities; individual directed goods and services, I'm going to talk about that more in just a second; assistive technology devices and transmission, so technology that helps with daily living, communicating, and/or learning; and home accessibility adaptations, so modifications to the home that help support independence. So what am I talking about when I refer to this individual directed goods and services? So in participating in self-direction, you receive a budget, and you use that budget to determine how many people you're going to hire, what the rate of pay is going to be for those staff, And any leftover money you have in your budget, you can actually save and use to purchase things you need that aren't otherwise offered through the waiver or other services. And that's what's called individual directed goods and services. Any purchase you make, you have to be able to make the link and the connection to a need or goal in your own personal plan. You also have to manage your budget and make sure that it doesn't cost more than the money you have left in your budget. There actually is not a pre-approved list of things you can buy. What people might need to support their independence can really vary. This is intentional, so you can be creative and customize this to your unique needs. Some really common and popular purchases that we see in programs across the country include investing in things like a gym membership, using Uber or Lyft rides to get to and from places in the community. Another really popular one is therapeutic horseback riding and music therapy, all different kinds of activities that enhance independence. So you may be wondering, can I still get agency services if I self-direct? And the answer is absolutely yes. You can always self-direct just one or a few services and receive the rest from an agency. This is not, strictly black and white. The choice to self-direct is just not all or nothing. So some people might be the happiest and most comfortable using primarily agency services, and then use self-directed services for certain shifts that can be harder to fill. For instance, an overnight shift where not been able to find someone reliable through an agency and feel you could have better luck recruiting someone on your own and supervising that person. You really get to choose the balance of agency and self-directed services that works best for you and your life. And if you find that self-directing just isn't a good fit for you, your case manager can always help you transition to agency services at any time. So there really is good flexibility baked in. So what does this look like in people's lives? What does self-direction actually feel like? So I'm going to share a couple of stories. First, John from Massachusetts. So John is 22 years old. He has epilepsy and intellectual and developmental disabilities. And he graduated from his local high school back in January 2020. And at that time, John and his parents needed to replace the services he had received at school, which is often, a big point of transition, and including he needed support in the event of a seizure. So John immediately began to utilize self-direction programming, and he had a self-direction budget that he used to employ some one-on-one staff support for community and meaningful activities. And he also invested in therapeutic horsemanship lessons using his self-directed budget. He also operated his own ice cream cart called John's Dream Ice Cream that he used to promote epilepsy awareness and raise funds for Epilepsy Foundation New England, and helped him really engage in his community. Now, you may have clocked into that timing of January 2020, and we all knew what happened next in 2020. And during the height of the pandemic, self-direction really empowered John to reallocate the portion of his self-directed budget that wasn't being used for other purposes during the pandemic to include more virtual services to allow him to have stability in everything he needed while remaining at home. John was also able to hire his brother as his live-in personal care attendant. And this had a lot of advantages. They already knew each other well, trusted each other, and they also had similar views about the level of precautions to take during the pandemic. So overall, the flexibility of self-direction really allowed John to maintain a safe and supportive living arrangement with his family, with access to meaningful community activities and employment. Now I want to talk about Robert, and these are real people, by the way. This is a made-up case study. Robert is from Pennsylvania, and he is a 34-year-old man with disabilities who self-directs. He has complex needs, both physical and cognitive, and requires 24/7 support in order to be independent. He had tried multiple different service models, including day services and living in a group home, before he determined that self-direction was really the best fit. Robert lives with his mom and receives round-the-clock support from 6 staff, most of whom have been with him since he began self-directing several years ago. Robert recruited and hired his staff. He set their rate of pay, trained them, and manages them. And with self-direction, he gets to really be flexible with his staff's hours and accommodate their lives and schedules. And essentially, he has the flexibility to create a work environment that has helped him maintain his staff over the long term. Now, when Robert previously lived in a group home, he actually went to the emergency room 12 times and had one pretty serious hospital visit. Once he began self-directing, he went to the emergency room twice during the first 6 months, and then hasn't been back in 4.5 years. So, with self-direction, Robert really gets to enjoy an everyday life. He's frequently out of the house, engaging with his community without a rigid structure of needing to leave and return at a specific time. He can dictate his own schedule and adjust when necessary. He does things he enjoys, like watching the news, paying attention to social media, and can really pivot if something comes up that means he can't follow the original plan with the flexibility of self-direction. And then a final story I want to share is about Kim and Marissa from Utah. So Kim is a parent who supports her 32-year-old daughter, Marissa, with living at home. Marissa has a developmental disability and several chronic health conditions that really put her at a higher risk of complications from COVID. So in 2020, when the pandemic hit, Marissa's doctor really advised that Marissa should stop all of her day activities, including her job at Utah State University Recycling Center. And Marissa began staying at home full time, which, as we all know, is a really hard transition. Kim, Marissa's mom, really struggled to maintain employment, so she was now providing almost all of Marissa's support. And balancing that need to earn income and support her daughter became incredibly challenging. Then Kim and Marissa heard an announcement from the state that Marissa's waiver now offered an option for people to hire and pay their parents through self-direction. So now that Kim could receive payment for some of the support she provided to Marissa, she was able to maintain her living arrangement and still focus her time on helping to keep Marissa safe in those early days of the pandemic. And we heard from Kim that it was stressful long before the pandemic, trying to juggle the safety and needs of my daughter, but with the parent payment option during COVID, life just felt calmer and more focused on the challenging, needful things. So now that the pandemic is unwinding, Marissa continues to have a positive experience participating in self-direction and kind of has adapted as the world has adapted. So I've shared with you a little about what this model looks like, what it's meant in other people's lives, but what does this mean here in Maine for participants and families? So as part of Section 29, you will have the option to self-direct some waiver services. Those waiver services on slide 9 that I listed can all be self-directed. If you choose to self-direct, you will take on new responsibilities. Those primary responsibilities include managing your own staff and managing your own budget. So let's drill down into those a little bit. So the responsibility of managing your own staff really includes recruiting and hiring those staff, finding people that you think are going to be a good fit to provide the services that you need. And you can, be as creative as you like in recruiting, and there may be even people that you already know are in your community that you think would be a good fit. We're also responsible for training those staff kind of about the unique needs you have in your own life and what services are going to make the most sense. You're responsible for developing a backup plan in the case of a staff being sick or unavailable or, an emergency. What are you going to have in place to make sure that the support you receive from staff is consistent? You will also have the authority and responsibility for developing a schedule for your staff, determining when they need to arrive and check out, and when you most need help throughout the day. And if needed, if you hire someone and they're not a good fit, you will be responsible for firing that person if you need to find someone else. And then the responsibilities for managing your own budget include deciding what the hourly rate will be to pay each staff member. So really looking and determining what you can afford within your own approved budget to determine how to cover your staff, making sure staff don't work more than you can pay them for. So really keeping track of that budget. And then determining what funds are left over to decide what goods and services you really need, and reviewing monthly reports to make sure that spending is on track. So you may be thinking, gosh, this is a lot of responsibility, but there are people who are there to help self-direct, so you are not alone. If you're on the Section 29 waiver, your case manager will share information about self-direction with you, and you will have the choice whether you want to self-direct or not. The case manager does not make this decision for you. This is an option if you would like to take advantage of it. Once you start with self-direction, you will also connect with additional support systems that will really help you to be successful in self-directing. So you're not, just jumping into all these responsibilities without any support. You will select both a support broker and a financial management services provider to assist you and to join your team. So let me talk a little more about what those roles entail. So a support broker is someone selected by the person who's self-directing to really act as a coach and an advisor throughout the process, so that it really helps teach you the ropes in terms of how does self-direction even work, how do I handle these responsibilities. So a support broker can do things like support the implementation of the person-centered plan, really provide advice about how to handle responsibilities of being an employer, all those tasks I listed, thinking about what needs to go into a job posting, how do I want to handle a job interview, how am I going to handle it when an employee doesn't do what I asked them to do, having someone to really process that with. The support broker can also provide advice about how to manage that personal budget, including how to use the budget creatively to achieve the person's goals. So for instance, you might know, okay, I really want to use my budget to invest in those, therapeutic horsemanship lessons, but how am I going to plan my budget to ensure I can include that cost? Support broker can also work to help monitor the spending and participant outcomes and just really be a support to make sure that everything's going smoothly. The support broker works for the participant and is part of their team, and that's a really important power dynamic to be aware of. The support broker is here to serve the needs of the participant. And if the participant doesn't feel that their current support broker is a good fit, they can select a new broker that feels like a better match. I also want to talk about financial management services. So a financial management services provider supports all of the financial and administrative tasks that come with being an employer. So that FMS provider will help manage payroll for each participant. So that's not something you have to do on your own by any means. Manage all tax payments on behalf of staff hired by the participant. When you become an employer, there are all kinds of tax requirements that the FMS will help ensure are all handled appropriately. They'll also manage unemployment and workers' compensation and provide reports to the participant and case manager about how spending is going. So the FMS provider really takes on all of the paperwork for people who self-direct and makes that process that much easier. So what do you do next if you want to self-direct? The self-directed option in the Maine Care Section 29 waiver will be available in June with a person-centered plan in the new format. So if you'd like to get involved, contact your case manager and discuss the self-directed option. And for more information regarding financial management services and self-direction, you can contact GT Independence, which is going to serve as an FMS provider in this program. You can reach them by phone. You will have access to the slides after this, so if you're seriously writing down the phone number, but you can reach them at 1-877-659-4500 or by email at customerservice@gtindependence.com. And again, you can have access to these slides after today. So if you're joining us as a case manager, what does this mean for you? So as a case manager, you will begin to introduce self-direction as an option under Section 29 to the people that you serve as part of the person-centered planning process and using standardized written materials about the program. You don't have to just make this up from scratch. You will be provided with this information. You'll also receive an approved questionnaire and assessment tool to support the determination about whether the person interested can self-direct independently or if they're going to require the support of an authorized representative. And you really play an instrumental and critical role in ensuring that anyone who wants to self-direct has access to that option. So case managers typically don't support their clients with the day-to-day mechanics of self-direction. That really is the responsibility of the support broker. So the case manager, you're really playing the role of introducing this as an option and making sure people know it's available. And then once someone is enrolled in self-direction, they have other supports to handle the day-to-day. So how do case managers support self-direction? People generally hear about self-direction for the first time through their case manager. So as a case manager, you'll really make sure that everyone who's eligible for self-direction learns about the option. Anyone who expresses interest is going to be encouraged and supported, and helping them think through what it's going to take to get started. And anyone who's not interested will be respected, because again, this is a personal choice as to what is the best path forward for any individual person. But the case manager should also be sure to remind annually that this option is available. Some people might not be ready one year, but be much more interested in self-directing in future years. And then each eligible person is really free to make their own informed choice about whether they want to self-direct, and a case manager ensures that choice is facilitated. So what should case managers do next to prepare for this change? As a case manager, you'll need to familiarize yourself with self-directed services. Thank you for joining us today. It's a great start to get yourself more familiar. Also remember that whether to self-direct, as I've been saying, it is the person's decision. It's not the case manager's decision. Your job is really to introduce it and ensure that you share this option with each person that you serve. And it's so important, if you have unanswered questions about self-direction, to get those answered. We've seen from research that when case managers are uncomfortable talking about self-direction with the people they serve, maybe they feel that they don't have all the answers, they feel a little insecure, this can actually really act as a barrier to access for people who want to give self-direction a try. And that means preventing more choice and control for people who want it and are entitled to it. So really, if you have questions, concerns, get the information you need to feel comfortable talking about self-direction with everyone you serve, and help honor everyone's right to choose whether they want to be involved. Now, if you'd like to learn more, there are further details about the self-direction option under Section 29 that will be shared shortly. And if you're like me and you'd like to just read everything as soon as possible, you can check out the basics of the new program in the documentation that was approved by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid for the Section 29 waiver in Maine. Additionally, there is a lot of general information about self-direction in practice from across the country that's widely available. So some places to start include the Maine Developmental Disabilities Council has published some great resources on their website. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services provide great resources and overview about self-direction across the country. And then there's a group called the Alliance for Citizen-Directed Supports, and that's actually run by people who they themselves direct their own services and want to support the larger national community in understanding how self-direction works and providing that peer-to-peer support. So they have some great resources on their website as well. And now that I've covered the basics, we have plenty of time for your questions and comments. I know Derek's going to join me for that as well.
Yes. Thank you, Molly and Angela. So I have been keeping track of everyone's questions, and I think some of the questions asked early on may have been answered during the presentation, but we will do our best to make sure that we address those now.
So a few questions that we have here are about payment, about whether or not a representative is paid or if a support broker is paid, and does the FMS provider charge a fee?
Great questions. So again, with Section 29 and self-direction currently for individuals with intellectual disability or autism is limited to Section 29. And so that does provide for budget authority, meaning if I'm the member, I'm going to select the services that can be self-directed under a flexible budget. So quarter-hour home supports and community supports. And I'm going to determine the amount and frequency of that service, which is currently already happens in the person-centered planning process. And from there, I'm going to determine how much I'm going to self-direct those services. And then the amount that I'm going to self-direct of those services are in essence cashed out. Doesn't mean that the member has cash, but it means that the dollar amount tied to that that service, that dollar amount is combined to create a budget. And then from that budget, you would then take out the per member per month cost of the FMS, which is $125 per member per month, as well as the cost of support brokerage, which is currently in the Appendix K. It's $68 for a maximum of 50 hours for a year under the Appendix K. And so those two services, the financial management service and support broker, comes out of your budget, which is that flexible budget.
So how has this worked with the national worker shortage? Have people who used self-direction experienced a loss of staff like the rest of the country?
I can talk about that. It's a great question. You know, certainly I do think that we're hearing across the board that, you know, workforce shortages are a challenge, you know, including for people in self-direction. But we do see in states across the country that having the option to participate in self-direction can help mitigate, particularly for people who have some natural supports already part of their community. You know, if you self-direct and you have a neighbor who you enjoy and get along with and can hire that person, that neighbor might be someone who, you know, doesn't want to just do direct care work for just anybody, but because they know you and have a good relationship with you, that's somebody who isn't typically part of the work pool that can serve in self-direction. So it's not to say that there aren't still challenges across the board, but self-direction can help to mitigate some of those workforce shortage issues.
How does it work if someone chooses to do self-direction and then decides they want to go back to agency services? How do we know what they have used from their waiver budget and what is left to determine what they qualify for?
Great question. So the financial management service is going to work with the support broker and the member on creating a budget tool. And so that budget tool really breaks down sort of what your overall budget is for a chunk of time, for instance, 6 months. And then the financial management service is going to bill against current authorizations that are self-directed to meet the timesheets that are submitted. So every person that the member is employing to provide them a self-directed service, they'll submit a timesheet which needs to be approved, and so it will take away from the authorization. So then when if the member decides that they no longer want to self-direct, they want to change to agency services, then the authorization just changes to the provider. So we would end the authorization for self-direction, and then you would still have the hours and the amount and the frequency that you've determined as part of your person-centered plan available for agency-directed services. Molly, I don't know if there's a better way to sort of describe that process or not.
No, I think you described it well.
Are there any employer fees the clients would need to be aware of with hiring people and hiring into their home?
If that person who asked the question could unmute to possibly ask that question in a different way.
I think it was answered by the financial management service. Thank you.
Okay, great.
How is hiring your parents with whom you live different from shared living?
Significantly different than shared living because shared living is a provider-directed service. So the department authorizes the chosen oversight agency, and then it's the oversight agency that has a contract with a shared living provider. So it's the oversight agency that directs the service under self-direction. If I'm a member and I'm living with my family and I choose to hire my family members that I live with, then I'm, as the member or the authorized representative, I'm in control of my schedule and what I pay my staff, the hours that I need for my staff to help me meet my goals and outcomes. So it's just the philosophy change from the member directing their own services versus having a provider to direct those services for you.
Is GT Independence the only FMS in the state?
Currently, GT Independence is the only enrolled financial management service for Section 29. There are other financial management service providers that deliver services for other sections of policy, but currently GT Independence is the only enrolled FMS for Section 29.
It seems like we push clients to get more and more natural supports and do things with natural supports, but now we are going to offer them to pay family members to be part of their life. Doesn't that defeat the purpose of natural supports?
I don't believe it defeats the purpose of natural supports. In fact, I think it really strengthens that relationship for the natural supports. Certainly from the pandemic, I've heard from many families that have become paid caregivers by the provider agency because they had no choice because of concerns around infection and the spread of COVID-19. They brought their loved ones into their home and under self-direction. You're paid to provide that service that's really needed to help the person. But there's certainly, we always recognize that there's, you can never measure the amount of natural support that's still going to be provided, that's not going to be paid. What we're doing is we're ensuring that that person can choose who is going to provide that support. And oftentimes that support's really sensitive and so this does strengthen natural supports. I don't, Molly, if you want to add anything sort of regarding the national experience around natural support and self-direction.
Yeah, well, I think you make really good points that certainly apply to what we've seen nationally. You know, I would also say that I think it is important to acknowledge that in any given person's life, there may be stages where it really makes sense to employ a family member. You know, for instance, COVID is a great example of that, or someone might be going through a sensitive transition where they just really would prefer to employ family members during that time. But, you know, over the course of someone's life, it's something that there may be a period where you say, you know, I really want my brother to be my brother, and I'm not going to pay him right now, and I'm going to focus on hiring other workers. But it's very nice to know in self-direction that in a crisis, or if something changes for me, I have that option to hire my brother. So I think it's important to remember over the course of time. And I think, you know, really thinking through as part of someone's person-centered plan, talking about natural supports and what that's going to look like in self-direction and how that might evolve over time, depending on someone's unique situation. Because as I said during the presentation, what each person needs and what their natural supports looks like and how they want to fold that into self-direction is just going to vary.
How do people get protection from being taken advantage of or victimized by family and friends?
I would say, Molly, and I'll ask you to add on. So nationally, there has been some experience around self-direction nationally where it is not the experience that people who are self-directing are more at risk of abuse, neglect, or exploitation than a person who's receiving a provider-directed service. There just is no difference. And so it's the same support that we offer members who have a case manager or a support broker in the financial management service. There's safeguards such as reporting, providing information and training around how to safeguard around and recognize abuse, neglect, or exploitation, and how to report that. So, so those are some of those safeguards that we've put in place.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate that, when we really look at the data nationwide, as Derek said, self-direction is at no more higher rates or greater risk of these kinds of occurrences, and, strong supports in place, including support brokers, the case manager, person-centered plan, all have mechanisms in place to guard against these concerns.
Who is responsible in the event of an audit? And how is it managed? How is billing managed to the state to get these funds?
So much of that is the responsibility of the financial management service to ensure that there's accurate reporting, ensure that there's accurate compliance with electronic visit verification, timesheets that they've been signed. There's also tools to help that member ensure that their staff aren't going above their approved hours. So there's budget tools, and there's a lot of safeguards that a financial management service puts in place to make sure that the service is provided and is within the budget and adheres to the person-centered plan. And a lot of that also supported by the support broker.
Are there any required background checks or trainings for workers?
Yes, and so I did paste in the chat the link to access the Appendix K. So Maine is bringing self-direction to Section 29 under their temporary amendment called an Appendix K. And so within that, we do outline that background checks are required, as well as initial training, and also those safeguards around reporting, reportable events, abuse, neglect, exploitation, and then understanding and having access to education around financial abuse, waste, and fraud.
Who is responsible for obtaining and paying for employment practices liability insurance to protect the individual in the event the person they hire files a claim or lawsuit for alleged violations of wage and hour or employment-related laws?
So I like to think of the financial management service as your payroll and your HR. So that's that function of the financial management service, is to ensure that all of the employees that are hired, that their workers' compensation and other payroll taxes has been paid, and that there are budget tools in place and reporting requirements in place to support the member to self-direct and those who are being employed to provide that service with the support of the financial management service.
Will they do electronic visit verification?
Yes. Yep, just like I previously said, electronic visit verification is the responsibility of that financial management service to make sure that there's the linkage between what the member has to access to sign off for EVV compliance, as well as reporting back to the department through the MEM system.
Can an agency apply to be an FMS?
Yes, any agency can apply to become a financial management service and demonstrate that they meet the qualifications.
Couldn't you do the same for section 21 with an amendment to the K, especially if this will mitigate the staffing shortage?
When we really look at the complexity and the comprehensive services under section 21, because of the Appendix K and the temporary flexibilities around the Appendix K, it was to roll this out or section 29 to understand what this experience would be like for individuals under section 29 to help us plan for the future for self-direction for everyone.
Has this process been reviewed with the IRS and the Department of Labor?
So self-direction happens in every single state. It's promoted heavily by the federal government at both CMS, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, and the Administration of Community Living. We're also really excited because there also has been legislation that has been discussed through Congress that really promotes self-direction as well.
And I can just add that, you know, at a national level, the IRS and the Department of Labor are familiar with self-directed model and kind of the unique employment arrangement that is part of this structure. So there are mechanisms in place in both of those national entities that fully support this program as designed.
How many states utilize this model and how successful has it been?
So every state across the country has some form of self-direction. We actually every 3 years look at the number of people self-directing nationwide. And so in 2019, there were over 1.2 million people self-directing. Not every state has self-direction programs, but might not serve every population that could be eligible. And while research still needs to be done, we're really seeing in the wake of the pandemic, self-direction has grown more than ever because of the flexibilities involved with the model. A lot of states temporarily chose to add more self-direction to their state using mechanisms like the Appendix K, and are deciding to continue to keep self-direction in place. So it's a widely adopted model that's been around for many years and has, decades of research showing the effectiveness of this model. And again, some of those resources that I pointed to, there's a lot more you can learn about self-direction in other states if you kind of want to get more of a flavor for what this looks like.
That's all of the questions that I have, unless I've missed something.
I think I saw one that maybe you hadn't read. It said, so it sounds like the agencies are just being replaced with the FMS, just saying the client has the choice to direct. The client currently has the choice at this time. I can start just by saying, I think the self-direction, the model really is quite different because the person who's self-directing is the employer. So it's not only the choice to who you want to hire, but you're then really acting as the employer, making active decisions over your budget. So those models really are different from each other, even though I know there's some, wonderful agencies that allow for a lot of choice. They're just legally it's different, and there is a greater degree of choice and control in a self-direction model.
Are the annual budgets going up?
So the self-direction follows what has been approved within the Chapter 3 for any combined limits or any service limits. It just and so your budget is designed based upon current and future limitations.
When the state audits and finds a problem, who has to pay money back to the state?
So the Financial Management Service is the entity that supports the member and and putting all those things in place to make sure audits don't happen. So it's responsibility of the FMS around alerts, if daily docs aren't completed, if background checks aren't completed. So there's a number of safeguards that would hold up and ensure that an audit, if there were to be an audit, that the FMS has all of that paperwork and all of those checks for the auditor.
That's all that's in the chat right now. Are you posting a link to the recorded session?
Yes, so we're recording today's session and we'll be posting this for people to use in the future, as well as please stay tuned because we'll be recording other trainings and providing other support as we roll out self-direction under Section 29. We're currently also participating with a reform group to look at permanent changes to Section 29 for self-direction, as well as we're also participating with a number of states nationally through a learning collaborative on best practices and what other states are doing that involves our partners at Speaking Up for Us, Disability Rights Maine, the Maine Developmental Disabilities Council, the support of MAXB, members receiving services, parents, and other stakeholders. So we're very excited about that opportunity so that we can learn from other states and to help what self-direction can look like in the future for everybody.
And it'll be posted on the ODE's website. Any other questions from folks? Well, there. Thank you, Molly, for that presentation, and Derek for answering all those questions. Thank you all for attending. And that's a wrap.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Absolutely.